Olá pessoal, bem-vindos a mais uma edição do Connect Business USA. Estamos aqui hoje com duas pessoas incríveis que eu vou apresentar. Como nós temos a legenda em português, nós iremos fazer essa conversação em inglês. And thank you both, Andy and Margarise. Margarise is the chairman, the CEO of BayBrazil, a great innovation hub at Silicon Valley, and Andy is executive of Silicon Valley Bank, an important institution of venture capital there in California. Thank you both, and please, Margarise, present yourself as a great Brazilian in US, building this bridge between businesses, between Brazil and the US. Thank you for your time and your presence.
Oi, Fábio, muito bom ver você novamente. Obrigada pela oportunidade. Olá a todos. Como o Fábio disse, meu nome é Margarise. Eu sou a fundadora e CEO do BayBrazil, que é a rede do Vale do Silício, focada em juntar tanto as empresas brasileiras e americanas que têm negócios com o Brasil, como também os profissionais, os indivíduos e o talento incrível que a gente tem aqui na região, muitos de Minas Gerais, inclusive. E o nosso objetivo é juntar todo esse ecossistema de indivíduos e de empresas e conectar com o Brasil. E aí a gente tem feito isso desde 2010, quando eu fundei a organização, e temos feito basicamente o nosso trabalho tem sido promover diálogo, porque a gente acredita que através da promoção de diálogo entre brasileiros e os americanos aqui do Vale do Silício, a gente cria mais oportunidade, mais conhecimento sobre sobre as duas regiões. E é aí que eu acho que essas conversas geram oportunidades que beneficiam os dois lados. Então, é isso que a gente tem feito aqui no Vale do Silício. Fábio.
E é exatamente esse o propósito. It's exactly the purpose of our project, Connect Business USA. And so, Margarise, please introduce our friend Andy and the whole of Silicon Valley Bank in the US.
Claro, então, quando eu fundei BayBrazil, gente, lógico que eu precisava de um time e eu fui procurar pessoas engajadas no ambiente de tecnologia Brasil e Vale. Uma dessas pessoas que tem sido um grande parceiro e também é nosso board member no BayBrazil, é o nosso conselheiro, é o Andy Tsao, que está aqui com a gente. Eu vou, então, agora passar para o inglês. Andy, I was just talking a little bit about you and telling them when I founded BayBrazil, I was very lucky to meet and engage with people that were working with the Brazilian market, such as yourself. So, Andy Tsao, Managing Director of Silicon Valley Bank, o Diretor Executivo do Global Gateway para o Silicon Valley Bank. Andy, it's such a great pleasure to have you here with us, and you are the most American Brazilian I know. Andy has been to Brazil many times, and I wanna for you to start by saying a little bit about you and talking about the role of Silicon Valley Bank in this bridge, Brazil and Silicon Valley.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Margarise, and delighted to be with the group today. And as I understand it, the topic is really about connecting to the U.S. and Margarise has done such a great job with BayBrazil in terms of building those bridges. And I know Margarise said she was lucky to meet me. I felt I was very lucky to meet her, and then we can talk more about Silicon Valley Bank's journey with respect to Brazil and Latin America and the role we try to play in helping building the bridge between Brazil and the U.S. as well. So a little bit about myself. I have been with Silicon Valley Bank now for quite a number of years, more than 2 decades. I have had many roles at the bank, which included working with technology companies and software companies, in particular in the Boston market, where I was based for about 7-8 years. And from there, I began to work on the bank's international expansion and moved to London in 2004. And I was based in the UK for 6 years, building our first international office in that market. When I had a chance to come back, I came to the Bay Area, where I've been since 2010. And so when I came back to the U.S., I began to work on a new business that Margarise described, which we call our Global Gateway. And having spent those years in the UK, working with international founders and international venture capitalists, I was very passionate about that concept and wanted to look at new markets where we saw the similar kinds of ingredients that are really key to our business. And what are those ingredients? Great startup entrepreneurs, international venture capital, technology, business models that were increasing. So all those things were very present in Brazil back in 2012, and when we took our first trip to Brazil in that year. So we've been traveling to Brazil almost for a decade now, and during that time we've seen remarkable growth in the ecosystem. So I'm privileged to say that we guessed right in terms of Brazil and LATAM in general being a real high potential market for technology, innovation, growing large scale businesses, unicorns, of which there are many in Brazil and Latin America today. So for those,
yes, and in fact, and I would love to have your perspective. So you started to go to Brazil in 2012. Fasting forward to 2021, so much has happened. I would love to have your sense of what is your overall perspective, that what it changed, what did it change from that point on? I know it's a lot, but if you can point out to the main aspects that you saw, you've seen throughout these years that caused this change.
Gosh, as you hinted at, Margarise, what hasn't changed, right? In a decade's time, the innovation ecosystem in Brazil has grown in so many different dimensions. And let me get back to answering that in just a minute. I think maybe just for some context, is it okay if I just take a minute to describe what Silicon Valley Bank does?
Of course, please do.
All right. So Silicon Valley Bank is almost 40 years old here in the U.S., and we're, one of the leading. There aren't many of us, but there are a few banks that are geared exclusively to the tech and innovation sectors. And so we were founded by entrepreneurs, again, nearly 40 years ago, raised venture capital, and really to aim at serving entrepreneurs. So in that sense, we're founded by entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs. And fast forward to today, where we are, one of the 15 largest banks in the U.S., but again, exclusively focused on the tech and innovation sectors. That means we work with more than half of the venture-backed technology companies across the U.S. and almost 2/3 of the investors, the VCs that work with those that invest in those startup companies. And so we provide anything from corporate banking, sort of your day-to-day banking needs. That includes lending, of which we're known to be quite unique in the ability to provide loans to startup companies, as well as to large-scale technology companies. We have a private bank that focuses on working with the personal needs of entrepreneurs and investors. We have an investment bank called SVB Leerink that, again, focused on tech companies that want to go public or raise funding or look for acquisitions. And then we also have a family of venture capital funds and fund of funds investing in VC funds. So hopefully that gives you a sense of SVB. And then in particular, as we looked at Brazil, we looked at it in the very same lens, looking primarily at the founders and entrepreneurs who are raising venture capital in US dollars, as well as the venture capital firms that were raising US dollars and looking to invest in startup companies. And that's where we began our journey back in 2012 when we took our first trip. We spent a few days in Sao Paulo, a few days in Rio, and ended up with a short visit to Brasilia as well. And from that point forward, we've been traveling to Brazil a couple of times a year. And obviously we haven't been able to go in over the course of the pandemic, sadly. But the very last trip I took before everything closed down, I was in Sao Paulo, and that was February of 2020, I guess. So that was my last in-person visit to the fine city of Sao Paulo. So what has changed? Boy, I guess the most obvious thing that's changed is the amount of capital available for startup entrepreneurs in Brazil. And I'm going to speak a little bit more broadly about the region, because the numbers, the data that's published by LAVCA, the Latin American Venture Capital Association, they're one of the better data sources. They don't, they speak more of the region than just Brazil. Now, Brazil always makes up a little more than half of the total number, so it's the largest market in Brazil. But back in 2012, there was, roughly $150 million invested in that year. And you think of where we are today at the third quarter of 2021, and we still have a quarter to go. We're already in the $16 billion range, according to LAVCA. So, doing the quick math, that is what 100x from where we were, back in 2012. Quite remarkable in terms of the amount of capital available for startup entrepreneurs. Part of why there's so much capital available today is the number of great startups in Brazil. Now, we met many great startup founders in the first few years that we began to travel to Brazil. And many of them today have gone on to build the unicorns that are, in market today. And one I could easily point out would be Nubank. And we met David Velez, the founder of Nubank, back in 2013, 2014. He was still part of Sequoia Capital at that point in time. And then he founded Nubank, raised some funding, worked with Silicon Valley Bank, and then began to build their business. And Nubank today is the most valuable fintech company in Latin America, with a valuation north of $30 billion. And so the amount of capital that companies like Nubank raised, or Creditas, or iFood, you just go down the list of unicorns in Brazil today. There are many more. There's a much greater number or supply of companies at scale for international investors to get excited about and to write larger checks to those companies today. So, certainly a lot more capital, a lot more unicorns back in that time frame. Let's see. I guess, Margarise, we can go in whatever direction you want, but another aspect of differentiation back in 2012, the Brazilian venture capital ecosystem would have said, "Hey, we're all about Brazil. It's a big market. We understand the Brazilian market first and foremost. We're not really investing outside of Brazil." If you look at the VCs in Brazil now, the Monashis, Kazeki, Valor Capital, they have now regionalized their businesses. They understand it's not just about Brazil. Brazil remains a very important market, but countries like Mexico, Colombia, Chile are also producing fantastic companies, and some of the capital provided by Brazilian firms are funding those great companies as well. So that's another, sort of the regionalization of venture capital that's historically centered in Brazil to other parts of Latin America. That's something that's changed quite a bit too.
And Andy, I think it would be great. Go ahead, Fabio.
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Margarise.
No, I was going to ask you, Andy, since you are working with a lot of the companies, how many clients in the Latin American region do you have right now?
So approximately about 800 clients across.
That's impressive. That's impressive. And I'm wondering if you could explain to the people watching, what is the criteria for you to work with a company?
Well, thanks, Margarise. It's a good question, and obviously, no one has a perfect crystal ball, right? If we did, we'd probably be doing something different than what we do every day. But the goal of the bank, the mission of the bank, is really to work with the best entrepreneurs around the world and help them to be more successful. And so we are not a bank that's licensed to do business in Brazil, so we can't do all the things that you would do you would need from a local bank every day. And so our mission is very specific. We're looking for the best entrepreneurs that are looking to build Silicon Valley sized businesses, really build unicorns, have that ambition to build, kind of world changing businesses. And oftentimes that means they're going to be raising venture capital. And as a U.S. bank who, works with U.S. dollars predominantly, we're looking for those startups and investors who operate in U.S. dollars, right? So there may be startup companies, perfectly good startups, who work with local investors and only raise in Brazilian real, and unfortunately, in those cases, that's not a perfect fit for Silicon Valley Bank. But if you're like a new bank, if you're like a Creditas, then you're going to be raising in U.S. dollars. You're trying to raise from the cream of the crop investors in and those are the kind of companies that are very similar to many companies across our platform, whether it's in Latin America or in the U.S. And those are the companies that we can that we aim for. Again, that have raised venture capital, are aiming to build large scale businesses, and of course, the focus on the would be another important aspect to our business, because that's our focus.
Andy, let me ask you something about the way that you're looking to early stage startups, because my point is, when venture capital is in a competition for the size of the check, you are in a hard competition. How do you look to the early stage startups operations, or how do you try to make relationships between entrepreneurs before the need of the big check of venture capital? And do you offer some kind of another points like market access, connections to company, to the startups, or just money? I'd like to hear something about these points.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. So at Silicon Valley Bank, we have the advantage of focus and expertise. Again, as I explained about the bank, working with startups, working within technology and innovation, that's all we do. We don't look at other industries, and so that allows us a lot of repetition, a lot of ability to understand the needs of early stage startup founders. In fact, there is a division within the bank that we call startup banking, and it's the area of the bank that our startup founders will first work with us as they begin to launch their business. This would be pre-Series A in terms of venture capital. That means they may have raised angel funding. That means they may have raised seed funding. And the issues for businesses at that early stage are really about, building the team, building the product, trying to determine product market fit. And so we have a specialized team that is all they do day in and day out, is work with our early stage startup founders through our startup banking group. And as a result, because of that focus, the network that the bank has for those early stage founders is one of the key advantages that the bank has to offer. We convene the community a lot, meaning we do a lot of events where we bring our startup founders together. We may do events like Ask Me Anything sessions with VCs. So we connect our startup founders with investors in order to be able to learn. We do many, especially during the pandemic, many webinars on various different topics that early stage startup founders really need help with. And again, a lot of that, it might be around, for example, hiring or trying to get your first customers, or again, raising venture capital, right? Those are all very topical for early stage founders. Finally, we have products that are designed for our early stage founders. For example, we have a banking package that we call SVB Edge, and again, that package really understands that early stage founders don't have a lot of funding at first, so there are no fees effectively with that early stage bundle, and for the first 3 years. And then as the companies scale and grow and become much more successful, then they can begin to pay conventional banking fees.
Very nice.
So hopefully that answers some of your questions. It is a lot about not only products, but the connections, the advice, the expertise that we think we can provide to early stage founders that will help them be a bit more successful than they would have been otherwise.
Andy, let me ask you something, Margarise, if you allow me to explore the Andy thoughts about the sector, because technology is a transversal sector. But of course, I suppose that you are looking to health tax, to retail tax, to education tax, and whatever tax, since that they have to be taxed. But I'd like to hear something about what do you think about the sentence that every startup will be a fintech, because they could deal with money anyways, payments, whatever they are, from health, for retail, from industry. And if you could point a little bit the future, some sectors that you are seeing that will have great change in the near future.
Yeah, very good question. So I fully agree with the assertion that fintech is becoming part of so many business models now. It's a natural evolution of many businesses. And we see that across our portfolio, in the sense that we see many more fintech companies that are trying to start businesses, and then many companies that were like marketplaces or other sorts of platforms that are that suddenly we have to treat more like a fintech because they're embedding a payments infrastructure or something along those lines, which makes them much more fintech. So a number of years ago, Mark Andreessen, who founded Andreessen Horowitz, made the phrase famous that software is eating the world, right? And we see that playing out certainly during the pandemic, everything is, forced to be digitized, and that's really accelerated tech across the world. And I think that's true now of fintech as well, right? It's the natural evolution of many business models to have a fintech component to their businesses. I was at a Mixer last night, networking event with H2, which actually has a chapter in Sao Paulo as well, for entrepreneurs. And I was chatting with the head of e-commerce within Facebook, and he was telling me about what a high-growing business that was for Facebook. And again, it's just another example of how fintech is becoming a very significant portion of Facebook's business going forward. And so 100% agree with the notion that fintech will continue to grow. And with respect to Brazil and Latin America, again, these are citing LAVCA numbers, the Latin American Venture Capital Association. The last year in 2020, they cited the statistic that 40% of the startups in Latin America were fintech related. So that shows you the opportunity within Brazil and Latin America as well. We see it certainly in our portfolio in terms of working with Brazilian companies. As you might imagine, working with fintech companies has its challenges from a compliance perspective. So, most banks, whether it's in Brazil or in the US, have to worry about things like money laundering, knowing your customers, and their fintech business models that involve, let's say, cash or payments, where it's difficult to understand the risk around those models, right? And so they take more work to onboard. And so as a fintech founder, for those of you on watching the webinar today, be prepared to get more questions asked as you come to the U.S. or look to raise funding. It's a slower go as a fintech model, particularly if you're dealing with payments, but there's great opportunity there as well. So in terms of spaces that are in the near to medium term that I think are going to be very disruptive and changing and a lot of opportunity. To me, I think one of the areas, and it is fintech related, would be crypto and distributed finance. All the potential around that aspect of fintech is really, we are really only at the very beginnings of how that's going to transform financial services over time. I think there's a good analogy to be said that where we are with crypto and DeFi today is very similar to where we were with the internet back in 99, 2000 timeframe. So I would bet a lot of money that in 10 years time, we're gonna have some significant businesses beyond the few names that everybody knows today. The Coinbases and the Ethereums of the world, that will be very, very valuable businesses. Now, again, full disclosure here, as I was saying about the compliance issues for fintech, that applies to crypto as well. And for Silicon Valley Bank, we actually do very little in crypto today because of those issues, because of the risk element. But I think that's going to change over time. Obviously, technologies like blockchain provide a lot more transparency. And again, I think it's a segment that is ripe for opportunity in the coming couple of years. And I know there's I know there's some Brazilian companies that are involved at the space in the space. So some promising startups in Brazil as well. Go
yes,
ahead,
one of them will be with us in the summit November 19, #Dex.
#Dex, yeah, exactly. I was just going to mention them.
But and just going back to what you were saying, like companies trying to expand and entered into the US market. I think, Fabio, one of the questions that and topics that we discussed was exactly how to avoid, what kind of mistakes to avoid when taking the companies into the US. If you could give some advices to the companies in Minas Gerais that are looking at the US market as a great opportunity, what are some of the steps that they should be prepared for, and mistakes they could avoid?
Yeah, good question, Margarise. First, I have not had the pleasure of visiting Minas Gerais, but one of my teammates is from Belo Horizonte originally. So, she's always talking about how great Belo is. And I know for certain that there are some terrific startups that are coming out of Belo Horizonte. So I know it's an exciting region in terms of startup development, but we're certainly keeping our eyes on the state. So in terms of advice for companies from Minas that are looking to the U.S. market, I guess some basics, Margarise. First, there are at the very foundation when you're thinking of entering the U.S. market, and you need to take into account legal and tax considerations straight away. And my advice there is to do that much sooner rather than later. So do your homework in advance. Make sure you don't end up with a structure that might cause you a undue amount of taxation down the road, and a structure that doesn't work out where you have to unwind it, and which will cost a lot of money and potential taxes. So many entrepreneurs we know say, "Oh, I'm going to," as far as lawyers go, I have an uncle who is a lawyer in New York, and he's going to help me. But if your uncle charges you, you're picking your uncle because he's charged you very little money, but he doesn't know much about helping tech companies come to the U.S. That's not a good choice. You really want to work with firms that have a lot of experience and expertise in helping companies come to the U.S. What people don't take for granted in bigger tech markets like the Silicon Valley, Boston, New York, not only do you have a lot of lawyers who are expert in working with many different corporations and corporate structures, but you'll have lawyers that all they do every day is work with tech companies and tech VCs. And so you have that level of specialization that you could really tap into. And it goes also back to the earlier question about, connections, advice beyond legal, right? And that those lawyers who focus on tech and innovation day in and out will also have that ability to add value. So that's one basic, sort of the lawyers and accountants that really will help you make sure you have the right corporate structure. A Delaware corporation, we see many Brazilian companies that need, when they raise money from international investors, will not only need a Delaware corporation, but an offshore jurisdiction to go with that, a holding company that's based for Brazil. It's typically the Cayman Island. And so again, I can't give you tax advice on that, but that is the most common structure we see at a Cayman Corp, Cayman holding company, then a Delaware corporation, and then the Brazilian operating company. So that's one of the basic foundations. Now, as an entrepreneur looking to enter the market, some of the mistakes we see is product market fit. I have a software that's selling well within Brazil, but I don't have any customers in the U.S., but I want to enter the U.S. market because it's the biggest market in the world. Well, it's a great ambition, and we love entrepreneurs with a lot of ambition, but make sure before you launch your business in the U.S. that you have some traction in the U.S., right? Product market fit. You can begin by selling from Minas and the best time to consider opening up a U.S. operation is when your customers are pulling you into the U.S. market. In other words, you have more and more U.S. customers. The amount of revenues that you're generating from the U.S. market begins to grow beyond 5-10% of your total revenues. Those are really good times to consider, hey, should I have a physical presence in the U.S. market? And ultimately, if you want to sell in the U.S. market, I do think U.S. businesses like dealing with other U.S. businesses. That doesn't mean you can't have a Portuguese accent, but if you can say, hey, my business is headquartered in San Francisco, it's a different conversation than saying, hey, my headquarters is in Belo Horizonte, right? Americans tend to like dealing with other American businesses.
Amazing advice,
Perfect.
Andy. I want to pass to Fabio because I know this is a very important topic for complementary questions. Fabio.
Thank you. You are giving us a very insightful conversation, Andy. Thank you so much. And I would like to understand a little bit from your point of view, a kind of typology of the amount, the sizes of pre-seed, Series A, Series B. How does these values are in your scenario here? Because here we have, of course, the difference of the value of currency, the rate, but I'd like to understand about the amount of money. What is a pre-seed? What is a seed? What is a Series A from your point of view?
Thanks, Fabio. The last few years, when you look at whether it's Brazil, whether it's here in the U.S., the amount of venture capital that's being invested is really growing to record levels. In the U.S., last year we had almost $166 billion invested. That was a all-time record. This year we're on track to certainly be more than $200 million. In the U.S., it may be even higher, 250, 300 is not out of the realm of possibility. So it may be as much as doubling off of a already very large base. So what does that amount of money mean to the various stages of staged finance? It means that everything is getting bigger. Everything is moving up and to the right in terms of the amounts of money at each round. It also means that VC funds because there's so much money, they're raising more money. So the VC funds themselves are getting bigger. And so by nature, they need to write bigger checks as well to make a difference to the returns of the overall fund. So there's a lot of factors that are making all the stages of funding bigger in general. So there's kind of a joke that we have now in the U.S. where we say, I think it actually applies to Brazil these days too, that the seed is the new Series A, right? I mean, it was the day that if you raised $8 to $10 million in the U.S., that would most certainly be a Series A financing. Well, that is no longer the case. That could easily be a seed round, 8 to 10 million US dollars. Series A rounds are commonly at like 20, 25 million, even 100 million plus for Series A.
Wow, it's amazing. Yeah,
quite different. And I know that's true, that the numbers are a little bit smaller in Brazil and LATAM, but that phenomenon of the seed round getting bigger is certainly happening there as well. So pre-seed can be very small, but up to like, I would say $3 to $4 million today is probably a pre-seed. And then again, the seed, it would go anywhere from, $4 to $8 million, typically speaking.
Amazing. And Margarise, if you allowed me to make the final question to respect our time and end the time, it's a value that if an entrepreneur build built a great business before, the next business will be pretty much easier to take the first check and the bigger check. Speak a little bit about this point for our entrepreneurs, understand the importance of the historical of success, and or not, maybe a great business that failure would be a great point to the next check. I would like to hear you about this point.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a premium put on the notion of a repeat entrepreneur. And I think, Fabio, to your point, investors and we at Silicon Valley Bank feel the same way, that each time you go through the journey of being an entrepreneur, and whether it's a failure or not, you're going to learn fundamental things that you can apply to your next business that will make you that much more successful, because you've done it, right? You've done it once before. It's not uncommon here in the Valley, and I know it's really beginning to happen in Brazil as well, where you have repeat entrepreneurs that are on their second, their third companies, and again, I think that's seen as very positive by investors as they do their diligence on if they want to invest, and particularly at the early stages, right? At the pre-seed level or even seed level, it is really all about the founder, the founding team. And if you have an entrepreneur that has been successful, and again, maybe even launched a business that didn't work out quite as well, a failure of sorts, can be seen as a very positive result and a favorable attribute for investors to get excited about. Now, I want to say, the view of failure in general in markets like the Bay Area is, again, generally seen as more of a cup half full, meaning the more positive side. Hey, you really learned something from that experience. You made these mistakes, or maybe these things happened that were totally out of your control and the business didn't work out, but you learn from that. And that means the next business that you're going to build, you're going to be that much better because you've learned from that failure. Now, there are limits to everything, right? If you failed really poorly, meaning, you made, some really horrendous mistakes along the way, that could work against you as well. So, but in generally speaking, I think the fear of failure is something in places, the more established innovation ecosystems, is something that is not nearly as pressing. And so companies can take more risk and to aim higher. And I think we're starting to see that in Brazil. We see so many great entrepreneurs that have built great companies, and I think that's something that Brazil has in common with the U.S. A lot of increasing numbers of great entrepreneurs.
Andy, I would like to thank you very much for your words, your experience that you share with us. I'd like to invite you as our guest to be in Belo the next time in Brazil, please. And Margarise also, it's our more than special representative there in US. And Margarise, please say the final words and talk a little bit about your next events. And you are doing a great work to bring to Brazil this new perspective, this tech perspective. And so, Andy, thank you again very much.
Thank you for having me, Fabio. I'm echoing you, Fabio. Thank you, Andy, for sharing your wisdom. It's always great to hear you, since you are following and being so active in the region. We really appreciate that. And Fabio, Andy is going to be again with us in November 19, when we are going to have our Latin American Digital Summit. We are going to showcase some of this new crop of entrepreneurs. Some amazing founders will be with us to discuss this startup boom, this incredible year for the Latin American startups. And Fabio, I hope you and some of Minas Gerais leaders and friends will be joining us November 19 here in Silicon Valley. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Fabio, and congrats on the work you've been doing at the Sindinfor.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You will edit this conversation, and I will send to you, Margarise, and please share with Andy. And I hope we keep in touch, Andy, with some new opportunities, new business we could share with you and have you in next events that you are planning to do next year. Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you. Have a great lunch.
You too, Fabio. Thank you.
Obrigada.
Thanks, Obrigado. Ciao.
Ciao.
Bye-bye.